How's everybody doing? Anybody's eyeballs floating? Everybody doing okay? Because we're going to just continue unless I get a hand that says...
I'm just walking out.
Okay. Or that's an option too. So, I really... Michael Havernick and I were driving here this morning, and I was just asking, how do you think the night went? Did you enjoy the content? And man, I just want to re-emphasize that more than anything else, there are simply two things we hope happen from your time with us this weekend. Number one, that you're encouraged, that you have permission to laugh and have fun, that you have meaningful conversations with each other, that there are things that you feel like God just kind of brings joy to your heart. And then the second thing is that you're equipped, that you hear things that you think, that's really helpful. I need to hear that. And even if it's just one thing that you walk away with through our time this weekend, that you would be able to embrace that one thing and say, this is really important for me to hold on to. So to be encouraged and to be equipped, that's really what our heart's desire is. Appreciate what Jeff did Friday just to kind of get us started and to bring us back to that purpose of what we're ultimately trying to filter everything we do through. That we worship God, that we love people, and that we make disciples. And that's the target. That's what we're aiming for. Everything that happens in the life of this church needs to filter through that purpose. And then he talked about identity, because sometimes in our drive to do something well, there's just this short little shift, and we'll see some of that in some passages that we'll look at today, where even in our efforts to serve and be faithful, we can shift into a place where what we're doing becomes our identity. It becomes unhealthy. And we'll look at some of that a little bit later. And then I love what Brian shared with capacity, because there's a balance to all these things that we're talking about. And we want to make sure that we're living. And I told my group just now in our time, man, I'm frustrated with the Lord because I don't like my capacity. I just don't. I mean, there's so much more that I want to be doing and so much more that I want to be engaged in. I just can't. I just have a limited capacity. And unfortunately, I'm a slow learner, so I keep pushing it. And I keep suffering the consequences for it. And I think, quite frankly, part of my limited capacity is because I too frequently live over capacity. And so it just drops the threshold over time. And so I think that's really, really helpful. I want to shift gears a little bit. We're going to talk about spiritual warfare. And as we do, I want you to look at this picture. You know, in the 18 and 1900s, they had this line infantry strategy in battles. And I've always looked at scenes like this and thought, there's somebody in this picture that I don't want to be. Who is it? The front line, but even more so, the guys holding the flags. I mean, they don't have a gun. They don't have any protection. They're completely exposed, and all they're doing is holding a banner. And I look at that picture, and I think it's important because that's a ministry leader. That's you. You're the banner holders. You're holding the flag for the work of ministry, for the glory of God, and that's your job. Yes, you're on the front line of ministry, but you're holding a flag. And so one of the things that I have in your packet is a question as we begin our time that I want us to consider, just kind of set the stage for what we're talking about. And the question is this: is true or false? And I want you to think about this, and then I want you to tell me what you think the answer is and why you think that's true or false. So true or false: as long as you're biblically literate, theologically sound, and spirit-led, then you are safe from Satan's attacks. Why? Define safe. Well, you define safe.
Because if you mean that I will not have attacks, then that is false.
Okay.
If you mean I am protected from attacks,
That's true.
then that's true.
Very good. Very good. That's why she's a professor. Because she knows all the answers. But it's really true. Yeah. But it's really true. Because if you think about it, we see examples in Scripture, the primary one being Jesus. I mean, was he theologically sound? Was he spirit-led? Absolutely. Was he tempted? For sure. Did he uphold in the temptation? Absolutely. Tempted in all things and yet without sin. I think of Job. He was a righteous man. And yet he experienced some difficult circumstances. And so just because you're theologically sound, just because you're spirit-led, doesn't mean that you're safe from being attacked, but there is a protection, and that's kind of what we want to unpack together. So if you have your Bibles with you, I'd love for you to look at this passage with me. 1 Peter 5:8. I think I have it up there. Again, I'm in charge of this. I knew I would forget this 100 times. 1 Peter 5:8. Let's look at that together. It says, "Be of sober spirit. Be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour." The first thing I want to do is just kind of unpack this a little bit. And it says, be sober and be alert. What's the difference between those two things? What does it mean to be sober? What does it mean to be alert? Why are those two things in that passage? What does that mean? This is the audience participation part of the discussion. What did she say? I didn't hear you. What did she say? I didn't. Monica. Oh. Okay. Kind of expectant, right? Alert is expectant. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. You're anticipating something. Very good. So that's alert. What's
sober? Go ahead.
Sorry, but we also choose to be mindful.
Okay, yeah.
Clear-headed.
Yeah.
Not distracted.
Say that again?
Not distracted.
Sober is not distracted. Okay. Yeah, Chuck.
Free from influences that would make us sleepy.
Okay, yeah, something that kind of dulls your senses a little bit. Okay? So the way I would summarize the two is basically what he's saying is be prepared, be expectant. Okay? So this is an important part of spiritual warfare. He's kind of giving us a clue on the front end of, hey, you've got an enemy. He's on the prowl. You're going to face temptation and struggle. Spiritual warfare is a reality. So be prepared and be expectant. And then it goes on, it says, your adversary, the devil, prowls around. Why didn't he say God's adversary? Why did he say your adversary? God doesn't have an adversary.
Not one that can do anything.
God has no adversary. We have an adversary, but God does not have an adversary. And then it says that he's like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. Now, as I've mentioned before, I'm a nature show freak, and literally everything Netflix and Prime and whoever else has ever produced, I've watched it. That's my game, I guess you would say. But anyway, I love it. But one of the things that I've recognized whenever I've seen a nature show is I've never seen what this verse says play out. I have never seen a lion who is seeking to attack a prey roar. They're always silent. They're always subtle. They're hiding. They're trying to get as close as they possibly can by moving as slow, as silently as they possibly can, so that in that most vulnerable moment they can attack. But in our passage, it says, your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. So why does that say that? Whenever we see in nature something completely different. Yeah.
Have you ever read the book or seen the movie Ghost in the Darkness?
Ghost in the Darkness, I haven't.
It's about that in the 1800s where these lions were attacking these people who are building a train across from Africa. And it's all about these, there are three of them originally. and they started liking the flesh of these people, and they started attacking, became man-eaters. And it's all about that. At night, you would hear the lions roaring. When they were coming after you, they were quiet. But at night, the fear, these people were sleeping, and they just kept hearing these roaring, not knowing when it was going to come in. So I think it's a fear tactic.
Yeah. What was the name of it again?
Ghost in the dark.
Ghost in the Darkness. Okay, note to self. I'll have to watch that. But I do think that what is being communicated here is important because it's telling us that our adversary has a strategy. And I do agree with you, Ron. I do believe his strategy is fear and intimidation. Because he knows that when we are hidden in Christ, when we are covered under the protection of God, he cannot touch us. But boy, if he can cause fear and intimidation to force you to run out of that shelter, now he's got you. But the key is the understanding that he cannot devour you when you are covered under the protection of God. But what he wants to do is he roars like a lion is to create disorder, to create fear, to create intimidation so that you leave the covering of your protection. And ultimately, those who are devoured are the ones, going back to what we said in the beginning, who are not prepared and who are not expectant. That's ultimately the victim of the adversary. So what I want us to think through a little bit is what does it look like to be prepared and to be expected? And so I have a few examples of what, three, I think, things that I want us to walk through together. The first one's humility. Paul David Tripp, in the book that we read, that a lot of this content has helped us kind of pull together. He says this, he says, spiritual pride leaves you exposed to spiritual attack. Spiritual pride leaves you exposed to spiritual attack. I would rephrase that and say it a different way, but the same thing. Once you think you're the exception, then you become the target. Once you think you're the exception, then you become the target. And so I want us to take a little bit of time to discuss with each other how does spiritual pride show up in ministry leadership, in spiritual leadership? So with your elbow partners, take a little bit of time and just what are some things that become evident when spiritual pride starts to invade a ministry context, your ministry leadership? So take some time to talk about that. Okay, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. So what's the evidence of spiritual pride showing up in a ministry context within ministry leadership? What does that look like? What did you say?
You become critical of others.
Ooh, that's a good one. You become critical of other people when spiritual pride starts to rise. David?
When knowledge becomes the end goal.
Yeah, knowledge is the end goal. The goal is for me to prove that I'm smarter than you are. Spiritual pride, for sure. What else?
Independence, not depending on God.
Yeah, I got this. Right? I got this. I've often said that one of the hard lessons that I have learned and continue to learn is the danger of getting ahead of God and feeling like this is something that I'm supposed to do and I just invite him to come along and make it better. That's spiritual pride. Spiritual pride.
Hiddenness, not sharing the 2%.
Man, yeah, hiddenness. I'll tell you everything that I can communicate to appear to be vulnerable, but what really is the last 2% is the most important part, and I'm not telling you that. Spiritual pride. Anything else?
Isolation.
Yeah, Lindsay.
Oh, this is Caleb's answer, but it was a good one. He said if you know, your purpose and identity get out of whack, then then the pride will come in the numbers or in the who you are, so it can show up in
Worldly metrics.
Yeah, you start measuring ministry by worldly metrics. That's an evidence of spiritual pride. Very true. In fact, let me give you three that kind of came to my mind as I thought about that question. The first one is that my success is based on my preparation. Okay? As long as I prepare well, as long as I'm diligent to look and be detailed in what I'm presenting, as long as my preparation is on task, then I can assure the success of what I'm going to communicate and what I expect people to do. That's spiritual pride. The second one I thought of is that my impact is based on my eloquence. So as long as I can not only prepare well to have the right information, as long as I communicate it effectively, then I can be assured that it will impact people's lives. That's spiritual pride. The last one I thought of is that outcome is based on influence. That's a spiritual pride kind of thing. Because in reality, John 15:5, I am the vine, you are the branches, abide in me and I in you, and you will bear much fruit. But apart from me, you can do nothing. And so really, if I could, at the risk of oversimplifying this, I think the key to humility is understanding that we ultimately have only one responsibility in ministry. And we talk about this all the time as a staff team. What do I need to do here? There's only one thing that's important for you as a ministry leader. Faithfulness. Faithfulness. Faithfulness in seeking the Lord and lingering in His presence without being in a hurry to leave. Engaging deeply with Jesus. Faithful to show up and just have meaningful conversations with people because you sincerely love them. And if you can just be faithful, then the Lord will do miraculous things that are far beyond your own abilities or anything you could even ask or imagine. If we just plant seeds, He grows trees. We can't do that. And not only can we not grow trees, we can't do anything about the fruit on those trees either. That's all a work of God. So the only requirement that He has of you, that we have of you, that we should have for ourselves, is just be faithful. It's just one thing. I'm a simple-minded guy. Don't make it complicated because you'll lose me. And so I'm going to make it simple. It's just one thing. Faithfulness. If you were ever, I've always wondered if the worship team observes this on occasion, but I try to every Sunday, in some moment, whether we're in a song or in between songs, just to stop and there's a prayer that I pray every Sunday, and they probably see me mumbling and wondering, what is he doing? This is weird. But here's the prayer. Lord, would you take the truth of your word by the power of your Spirit and impact the lives of your people for the praise and glory of your name? Every Sunday. And one of the things that does for me is, did you hear me or I or any of those pronouns in that prayer? Because that prayer shifts my attention to Him. This is all about Him. This is your word. It's only affected by the power of your Spirit. I love these people, but ultimately, they're your people. And all of this is being done for the praise and glory of your name. And I think that's an important shift for us to keep in mind, even as we function in the ministries that God has called us to. So it's not about us. It's all about Him, and that comes from that humble heart. So how do we engage with the reality of spiritual warfare? What does it look like to be prepared and to be expectant? Be humble to begin with. The second thing is be in community. Leadership is a lonely place, and I didn't realize that until even when I was at the hospital and had some positions of leadership there. But it really became magnified, much to my surprise, when I came and joined the staff in a pastoral role at Melanie Park, because I've been at Melanie Park for 35 plus years. And so I'd already been here 2 decades before I ever started serving as pastor. So I had lots of connections and friendships. And then all of a sudden, it's what I called the force field of ministry. All of a sudden, I became a pastor and everybody did this. It was the strangest thing for me because these are people that I knew, that I grew up with, that we had raised kids together, and there were really meaningful relationships. And I swear to you, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you the force field of ministry is real. They took 2 steps back, and I was like, whoa, what just happened? I need you to be close. Why did you just back up? But the reality is that there is a loneliness to ministry. Sometimes it's just wrong assumptions that, somehow now that he's pastor, then he's got it all figured out, and so it feels intimidating. And, when I go to his office, it feels like the principal's office. And, I asked Terry, I said, man, do whatever you can do to make my office look like a living room, because I don't want people to feel uncomfortable when they come in. I want them to feel like this is home, not the principal's office. But sometimes we can create that force field ourselves because there's a fear of being known. And when we're in a ministry leadership position, there is a tendency to present ourselves absent of flaws, or you won't listen and respect what I have to say. And I know when I first came here, this was hard for me. Because I looked out into an audience of people that I knew, many of them knew much more than I did. And yet I was supposed to teach them. I mean, that's, talk about intimidating. I mean, I was overwhelmed. And so I spent a lot of my early time as pastor at Melanie Park trying to make sure everything I said was perfect so that I could avoid any conflicts of contradiction and questioning of my abilities. There's this fear that if they really knew me, then I would no longer be effective. And then I'll talk about this here in a little bit. The Lord dealt with that by crushing me. And so then my weakness became public. Then I couldn't hide it. Interestingly, that's when ministry became most effective. The number one factor leading to moral and spiritual compromise among ministry leaders is isolation. Did I just do that? Okay. I want you to see that again. The number one factor leading to moral and spiritual compromise among ministry leaders is isolation. In this book, Lead, that we looked at together, over and over, the repetition of this kind of resounding theme was, you've got to do leadership in community. You've got to do leadership in community. You've got to do leadership in community. Interestingly, right about the time we were studying this section of the book, all the things about Ravi Zacharias hit the news. You remember that story? He was somebody who had tremendous influence, right? And there were accusations, and his group of people who were in ministry with him said, oh, he would never do anything like that. We know him. It's impossible. But as things began to unfold, what you realized was he had created for himself a force field of ministry that allowed him to isolate from a ministry community. And as a result, they had no idea what was going on behind the scenes because he had become isolated and they let him. And so when we think about ministry leadership, if we want to be prepared and we want to be expectant, then we got to be in community. That is part of the protection that God provides us to endure against spiritual warfare that we are inevitably going to face. And so do not get isolated. It is the number one leading factor in moral and spiritual compromise with ministry leaders. So let me ask you this, and I want you to discuss this around or with your elbow partners. I like that, Jeff. It's really good. So the question is, what does healthy leadership community look like? Okay, if we say it's important, we say it's protective, then how is it healthy? What does it look like? So talk amongst yourselves and ask that question. What does ministry leader community, healthy ministry leader community look like? So what does ministry, community, healthy ministry community look like? Somebody give me your input. Honesty, transparency, vulnerability, absolutely.
And added to that, accountability.
Accountability, yeah. So there's a loving accountability, because one of the things you don't want to do is celebrate each other's sins. Right? Oh yeah, I struggle with that too. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I understand. That's hard. And then we go on and continue. Let's try to do something better with what we're being honest about. Right? That's the goal. Not celebrate our sin, but actually be transformed so it can be different. Yeah. So humility, community, and then the other thing is patience. The last thing is patience. An unavoidable reality of ministry. Jeff and I, we've talked about this many times. This is hard, but here's the reality. You're going to disappoint people. This is hard for people pleasers, for approval junkies like me. You're going to disappoint people. And one of the arrows that stings the most is criticism. Right? When somebody doesn't like what you said, how you said it, and in ministry leadership, you're going to have, it's inevitable. You're going to disappoint somebody. Now, I've told you this story many times, so I'll run through it quickly, but I want to unpack some good responses. But when I was at the hospital and was meeting with my vice president, I walked through one of my departments. I was thinking about our meeting and things that we were going to be discussing on the agenda. We finished our meeting. I walked back through that same department, and I had one of my employees stop me and say, wait. Can I talk to you for a second? I said, sure, what's going on? And they looked at me, and as serious and sincere as they could be, they said, why do you hate me? It's like, whoa. I mean, it totally took me off guard. I said, I'm so sorry. What do you mean? And they said, you walk right past me. You look me in the eyes, and you don't ever say a word. Why do you hate me? And so that was an eye-opener for me, because I'm a very tunnel-visioned, single-minded, simplistic guy. And so it became real evident that if I'm not careful, I'm inevitably hurting people unintentionally. And I need to be mindful of being intentional when I engage with people, that I don't just look them in the eye without having some acknowledgement of who they are. So let me just kind of walk you through, in the inevitable reality that you are going to face criticism. There's going to be, and again, sometimes it's justified, sometimes it's not, but your response is the same either way, because it doesn't matter. Okay? It doesn't matter. So whether you were at fault or whether you were not at fault, whether you were innocent, I'm suggesting that this is the exact same response either way. The first thing is apologize. Again, whether you're wrong or not, your apology is, I'm so sorry that I hurt you. Will you please forgive me? Because even if it was unintentional, the effect is the same. And so just take ownership of the fact that you caused hurt in someone else's life. I'm so sorry. Would you please forgive me? The second thing is, there may be an important place to clarify understanding. And this is where you kind of rephrase what they told you. This is what I hear you saying. I'm so sorry. I didn't intend to hurt you. This is what I hear you telling me. You mentioned that when I walked through it, so I saw you in the hallway. I kind of remember that now. And I understand what you're saying. I looked you in the eye and I didn't say anything. I'm so sorry. So clarify the understanding and then recognize their perspective. I can see how that would be hurtful. I can understand why that would have communicated a message to you that would have been painful if you felt like there's something that I was holding against you. And the fourth thing is just clarify your intention. And this is a place where you can say, man, I just need you to know that's not what I intended. I'm sorry. I can see how that hurts you. It makes complete sense to me. But can I just tell you, that that's a weakness on my part and not an intentional message to you. And then the last thing is gratitude. Thank you. I mean, always in the conversation this way. Thank you for being willing to share that with me. That was really helpful. And for me, when I was at the hospital, I met that incident caused me to have a meeting with every one of my departments and to recognize with them, hey, I just need you guys to know I just recognized something about myself with someone who was courageous enough to have this conversation with me, and I'm going to go on the assumption that she's not the only one I've done this with. And so I met with every single one of my departments and just said, listen, I need to apologize to all of you with the possibility that I've done this before, but regardless, I want you to know I'm going to really work on this. And I want you to help me. When I am getting off kilter and a little too focused and can be distracted where I'm missing out on important conversations with people, would you just draw me back into that and just allow me to grow in this area that I need to develop in? And man, it changed my leadership. That was the turning point in what I was doing at the hospital. And to this day, it is a reminder to me of what's important in my ministry leadership. So humility, community, and patience. Those are the three things that I think can allow us to be prepared and expectant. Humility, community, and patience.